Hello everyone and welcome. I'm Alberto, this is Fuse Room, and this video is about Tape Sculptor by Impact Soundworks. Now there's a million plugins out there, and a lot of them are tape emulations. Why would we want to cover this other new plugin? Well, it's new, so you could say, well, it's a new plugin, so we want to do it, but it's not about that. Right about the time this plugin came out, I was preparing my template for some new scoring work. I had been given some directions and I was looking, for tools. I like to do that just to build my own working environment and then start writing music. I don't really gel well with just whatever tape emulation plugins, as much as people would think. Tape emulation is amazing, tape machines are great, but they just don't really work on what I do. So this plugin came out, I tried it, and I was like, all right, this thing takes, as it says, tape machine emulation to more of a sound design level. It's a Sculptor thing. And it works even very well as what you would think tape could do. So I would like to keep this video super direct. We're going to take a look at the features and then we're going to do some examples. But I would really like to transfer to you how effortless it is to use it as a tool. And this to me is very important. When I compose, I also mix. I don't do separate mixing sessions. So I write music, compose, then compose again, write new tracks, do some changes. It's all, the sound design part is very crucial to me up until the very final stages in which I might do mastering. So let's go. And here it is. I really love the interface. It's flat, but it's modern. It's, 3D just enough, and it's got a nice touch of orange. On the top, you got a global bypass, presets, A, B, and show high tooltips and animations. The OpenGL user not, I don't use it, find it a little bit more compatible. Zoom level, generate key file, and about. Now, there's 4 main processes, and then there's 6 secondary, which are not less important, but they're like a little bit more into the sound design and effects kind of stuff. Everything gets blended into the output module. So you got a dry wet, you got input and output gain controls, very useful. If you obviously drive the input in, with more gain, you will get more of the tape processing effects you've dialed in, right? The balance, which can be left or right, or mid and side, depending on whether you're working with left, right, or mid side. Then you got a global makeup, and this is the auto makeup. Do you want it to 100% compensate for whatever you've done in the processing, or do you want it to not compensate, 0%? You can go all the way in between from 0 to 100. Now, the nice thing is that the balance knob, when you right click it, has rebalance on output. So the processing goes to the balance you're deciding, but then it gets rebalanced before getting out to the track. This means that you can affect specific areas of the signal, for example, just the mid or just the side. And again, if you don't want to rebalance, you just disengage that. Every control can be right-clicked and you can see all the parameters and numbers. You can assign MIDI. It's really nice. Now, what does it offer in terms of signal chain processing? Well, you got filters that you can obviously fine-tune in terms of high and low pass. You got the poles you can decide from 6 to 96, and you can apply makeup. This means that the audio gets sent back into the original signal. So it's sort of a, I wouldn't say an emphasis, but it's a completely different way of deciding that. Nice visualizer as well. And then we go into the emphasis. More bass, more treble, sort of what you would expect in a tape machine, like very, I wouldn't say accidental, but it feels very musical. And then the frequency, which is the crossover point between bass and treble. Then we got the compressor, and this has its own threshold by this, horizontal line. It will display an animation while we're going, which will tell us whether or not we're compressing. The blend, if we want to blend the compressed audio with the uncompressed. And then there's the usual controls: ratio, attack, release, and knee. This thing, I just want to tell you this in advance. The compressor module alone, with or without emphasis and a tad of saturation, is a plugin on its own. It sounds really good. The dynamic processing of this plugin is very addictive. We'll see it in a second. Let's keep going. Saturation. Again, you can turn it on and off. You have a drive, which is the hysteresis amplification, so how much you want to drive into the circuit, the bias of the saturation, and the saturation itself, the amount, right? See how the tool tips keep us on our toes, right? You got oversampling because this process obviously will introduce harmonic content that can then bounce back, introduce aliasing. So you can oversample from 1 to 16. You got a minimum phase mode or linear, and you can decide whether or not you want the offline processing to be on a different factor, right? This is useful because when I compose, I don't want to go super overboard with oversampling. It's just going to completely kill the latency compensation. But when I render, unless I find that I can be surprised by maybe a higher quality that kind of gave me, I don't know, just a sound that I didn't quite want, sometimes it might happen. I usually tend to just oversample a little bit more, maybe just one step further. The core of the saturation circuit is this mode area here, these fields, this drop-down menu. You got RK2, RK4, NR4, NR8, and STN. Now, the manual explains this in detail. There's no way I can do a better job than the manual itself, but RK2 is lower CPU usage, lower hysteresis behavior emulation. So you got a little bit less usage of your CPU, you got a little bit less of an authentic behavior. RK4 is, I would say, standard, sounds pretty much fine. I kind of always use that. And NR4, the manual says that if you have static signals, these can induce a little bit of a lower processing usage and maybe yield a little bit better results. I don't know. I tend to use either RK or NR4, but it's just up to you. NR8 is more intensive in terms of processing, but it yields better result. And STN uses the manual says neural network. So this is Skynet stuff. It uses Skynet probably to create a model that is not authentic, but that can yield kind of cool, maybe sound design processes. Experiment with that because you got a lot of leeway with just these 5 elements. All of these goes into the Degrade to loss Flutter Wow delay. Now, Degrade, for example, which has obviously nice animations, which again you can turn off if you don't want to be distracted by that, has a his control, and then it's got envelope, amount, variance, and depth, and it also has a soft behavior. Now, this depth, variance, envelope, and amount will decide how much of this degradation, which I wouldn't say is sort of a lo-fi beat crashing, but it kind of sounds like we're going to experiment with it. So they decide how you want to mangle and degrade your sound based on a tape behavior, but not quite 100% to me as, just a normal, good, I don't know, appropriately calibrated machine would do. You can take it further, which is why I like to use these rather than realistic tape machine emulations. In my case, chew will chew on your sound. We'll try it. It's got depth and frequency and variance. Loss will decide a little bit more of a standard behavior of what we expect from tape machine plugins. So you got your speed, you got your thickness, your spacing, gap, the azimuth of the heads. This is all terminology that you will find in real tape decks. So this is probably why if you want to go with a more kind of tape realistic emulation, you probably want to have a least loss in all of these. Flutter and Wow, they don't need to get described. A lot of plugins have these. You have it here as well, rate and depth. Look at how nice the animations are. And then you got your depth, rate, drift, and variance, which is again a random factor, right? Last but not least, the delay. A delay syncs or doesn't sync with the BPM of the session, and it's got feedback mix, and it's got these 4 taps that you can play with. It's got time. You can decide whether these different taps have different times. Then you decide the pan of the different taps and the level. So depending on which button you're pressing, the number will decide which parameter of that tap is going to work on. This is everything pretty much there is to say, because the rest is just about using the plugin. So we're going to go over different examples, and I'm probably going to start from the mix bus, because as boldly as we can go, you just drop these in your mix and say, all right, what can you do? Let's see that. The preset I want to use just as a startup on my mix bus has emphasis, quite a lot of it, but I am crossing over at around 2K. And then it's got a compressor set at the minimum, which is 10:1. I tend to love the minimum ratio here. Blending at 50%, saturation the way you see, a little bit of loss just set to speed, 30 IPS, 0.99 of thickness, the spacing, the gap. It's fine because the parameters and the scales are what you would use in real tape decks, which is really insane. Then we're gonna go without makeup. We're gonna play with the auto makeup and mix at 100%. It just has to be off first and then we instantiate it. It sounds really good, and it makes the mix a little bit more concave, if that makes sense. And this is kind of a theater screen subliminal thing. Now, I don't care if this is tape. Is this tape? It is tape. Is it bass compression? Is it bass saturation? Is it bass EQ? I couldn't care less, to be entirely honest with you. I don't care. It just sounds good. And these processes just blend together in different things. Now we could overanalyze this, you know, if somebody famous does this, you say, oh, that's a genius move, a 50% blend. The attack is the 10 milliseconds, 213 release, that's the trick. I don't know, to be completely honest with you again, it's just, I don't know, you turn the knobs until it sounds fine. And on a mix bus, you could do thousands of things. But this is just what I ended up here just for test purposes. And I was like, it preserves the integrity of the mix. It just sounds a little bit bolder somehow. So now we're gonna use it on single tracks and maybe go a little bit overboard, right? Let's start with percussion and drums, because that's usually nice to just get a vibe for it. Now I could take the rebalance on output out and just fine tune the side to mid. Because there's not a lot of side content, this will probably offset things towards a sense of a volume change, right? So I'm gonna just rebalance and maybe work so that the saturation, what I'm doing is more centered on. Well, this sounds quite cool. It's a little bit different. We're gonna compare, but it has that edge, right? Because the percussion parts were dark, and I kind of like it. But what if I wanted to go a bit more classic? I'd have a little bit more point. So I'm gonna go copy A to B, so I can tweak B without affecting the A, which is good. And I'm gonna try and compress it even. So you hear how loud that is, but now we're gonna blend it back. You hear how it's just, that little bit of parallel compression just pushes your kicks forward, right? How about we hear it in the full context of the mix without and then with? Sounds good, right? It just moves the kicks to that point where the production team's gonna say like, yes, we're gonna license this song for 5 years and you're gonna get a way to buy groceries. Could be that, or it could be that you just like it, but I think it's really nice, so it doesn't matter how you spin it. Next, I want to try it on different drums. On top of those percussion tracks, there's this kind of higher frequency content grooves, so they sound like this. Okay, now we're gonna try it. I don't want to use the top modules as much as actually these, maybe saturation and the degrade, chew, loss, just the bottom part now. I have nothing to say. This sounds so creative and fresh, and it just gives you ideas. Now let's degrade, chew, loss, flutter, wow, delay. Just maybe the flutter and wow we won't need that much. The delay, not even. There's live pedals here going on. But degrade, chew, and loss, of course. Especially the first two. Now it feels great, it vibes nicely, the frequency is at 44%, and you might think, well, if I'm gonna sync it with delay on or off, I have a syncing on the frequency as well. Well, no. Maybe this is something Impact Soundworks will do in the future, but just go by ear. You know, you'll find where it vibes and you can add variance, although I kind of like it without now. And you can then just, you know, ease out the mix knob. Isn't it cool? And to be honest with you, again, I don't think the frequency would need to be, it would be nice to have MIDI control like BPMs and stuff, but if it vibes, it vibes. It's actually a little bit more analog, and I love this sort of resistor coil thing. Now let's try Degrade. Let's try the hiss. Hear these out. We know that hiss, white noise is really important in any sort of scenario in which you want to have a distinct sound stage, or techno does it, a lot of electronic music does it. There's a reason behind it. Hiss here pretty much plays in our favor as well. Remember, this track goes into pedals for reverb and delay, other controls and things, and it just develops. That's the nice thing about it. So let's try and play with variance, depth, amount, and envelope. Remember, soft just makes it a little bit easier to handle the depth. I don't think we're gonna need that, but let's try and go wild. Have you heard it? Have you thought, this is a transition generator? This is something I could automate to just generate tension and then release it, right? Drop stuff. That's what the young people say. Yes, the answer is yes. It's really nice. Again, we could mix and match, but you could still turn on chew. Sounds good. How about with the kicks? heard how 36 to me was a little bit flubby if we wanted to really have some punch. 38 works. Now it's all a matter of can you hear it in your room, but we're not doing that. The plugin works. We're not Impact Soundworks not responsible for your neighbors or your police forces kicking into your door, but you know, it sounds good. So unfortunately, they will have to hear it. Now, I say synthesizers. Okay, I have this Prophet 12 track. Sounds like this. How can we make it a little bit more interesting? So I think we're gonna probably try the saturation again, and I wanna try this time. I have a thing for STN whenever we're doing kind of sound design stuff, and oversampling to 1 is fine. Let's try this, and again, let's prepare it with a mid-side processing. Nice, but the patch I've done already has a lot of that. So in this case, I wouldn't use it. I want to try something a little bit different, like try and contain this because it's floaty, it's nice, but what about something that could put a lid on this synth to avoid the delay lines, to maybe overwhelm the mix? We could do it with a compressor. So blend 100%, threshold all the way up at super fast attack, ratio of 10, I would say it's fine, and a release of, I don't know, 200 and change. I'm not even seeing it here, so we have to sort of push it in. Now we can see the signal, and that's because the input gain, obviously that fader affects everything coming into the modules, right? I really like what it does. It just doesn't quite sound like it's compressing because there's an upright compensation that is in play, right? Nice. Okay, now Degrade, of course. Hear how thicker that is? I have sometimes to just stop it right there because it's so clear once we have that on-off vision, right? Now I'm gonna try and play with the loss. What does it sound like? Well, it's spacing and gap are kind of affecting the phase relationship between the two speakers, and I kind of don't like it where it is because to me it just sounds fine the way I programmed it, but it could be nice if you had a very centered kick, for example, because you won't hear it sort of smudge itself out. So again, this is sort of a tape machine emulation, kind of subtle compared to Degrade, but really nice. Now what I want to try and keep is something else that could benefit from a little bit of Flutter and Wow. Let's go to some sort of organic atmospheric sound. So hear it out. This is without. And let's play with the Flutter control. how 3D that becomes. It could survive on its own. Some tracks, sometimes you want to add so much stuff. And then one sound, one effect, it's all you need. This is really cool. Let's try the wow on this track as well. It's really nice. And again, this is maybe the weirdest of uses, but it's good. It's good. Let's try the delay now. I want to try something bold on this track. It's my bass line doing this just ostinato part. How about we want to turn delay on, sync it, and try and find, first and foremost, I would say just let's use a level of 1 and pan it all the way left. Let's decide on the timing while we have this mix, maybe 50%, and find a pattern that kind of plays in favor of what the groove already says. Okay, so we could do a 16th of a note and then just maybe dotted 16ths could work, maybe dotted 8s. I want something fast in tempo and see if it works to just expand my sound, the bass sound a little bit. Now I'm extreme, 100 and minus 100, then I'll close it down. But if they're so just outside of the center mix, I'll be able to just assess it better. Then we'll close. See why I wanted this? Now we pan it inside. Now I want to try some chew here. This, but just a little bit. Now, it sounds a little bit too much, but I've done this a lot of times, and it will just act as a filler. Now, I've only turned on a couple more tracks so that you can hear what it does, and these 3 notes are on the E and A. The 1, 2, 3, 4, the downbeats of the quarters are not there. So it's important that these fillers kind of work organically in the bass, but a little goes a long way. It's still a lot, but within the context of these that I've turned on, let's hear it out. As opposed to how does it sound like? Like reverb, because you have delay lines that kind of build up on the single sound. And what this does is that your sound just goes a little bit behind. And it becomes different than what I had thought, and it's no longer the function it has in the mix. But this could be nice, and you could design things around it. It's a little bit rounder, a little bit like there's a thicker air, like a smoky air, right? And it's blending well. Now, the other thing you could do with delay is just take chew off, turn bypass off, mix 100%, we can drop sync off, and now we're dealing with tempos that are in milliseconds. This is kind of nice because we can design sort of a bucket brigade delay. You hear it? It's flanging out, right? It's opening the sound from mono to a little bit more of a flatter, bit wider thing. On vocals, this would be insane. Ooh, hear how it's feeding back. Just a little bit like 30% mix, which is like 29, okay. Without and with. A little goes a long way. And again, it's a Sculptor. So you are introducing these tiny little effect changes that in the long run will just completely design your sound. And it could make the difference between just a patch that doesn't want to blend, could be strings as well, or brass or woodwinds, and something that does it. And delay can help you achieve that. And I've said strings, and I do have strings, so I want to try and build a tape Sculptor patch that will improve the sense of soundstage of my orchestra. It just plays at the very final part. It's sort of like cellos, violas, and violins, and it sounds like this. Now with, follow me on this one. It's like, how could it be like you moved seats in the theater and now it's a little bit, it's a different type of concert. It's a little bit more direct. It's a little bit of a different miking if you were miking this orchestral part. So I like it, and I want to try and do some loss probably. Wow, that was good. Okay. I'm not gonna even touch spacing and gap. I don't know what I'm doing, so it's okay. Now, how about maybe a little bit of flatter, or, well, let's try the wow. It will kind of open, I want to open this orchestral sound. You hear the drama? Okay, well now, well, a lot less. I like this. Let's try saturation. Let's try an R8 just because. And let's reset the controls. It worked. And again, it sounds like we're removing the nose of that woody resonance. Sometimes it's very hard to just remove it when you're close miking strings. Sometimes you want that, but it's nice to know how to handle it. And fun enough, you can do that with the tape emulator. It's just some frequencies that we're putting in focus and we're kind of blending in a little bit against phase with the original. And so it kind of cleans itself out. We could go on for hours, you know that, obviously. And it kind of grew on me this way. I was using it as a demo on a couple tracks, and it kind of worked. I was like, all right, this thing is working. So we keep it, maybe print it, use it again, use it once more. The latency is good, so I could play on it, you know, just straight into it. And then I was like, all right, I need that kind of effect tape sculptor. I need that. I could do this a little bit more like a tape sculptor. And when that happens, I have a number of plugins in the ears that keep just, you know, my template busy. It's usually a good sign for me. It's something that is a real tool in the sense, an instrument to just get the sound in my head to the result. Sometimes it surprises me on the other hand. So in a good way, like I'm hearing something, it doesn't happen, it happens something different, and it keeps things fresh. So my hope, as usual, it's not about Tape Sculptor, is that you got ideas on how to make your music sound even better, how to achieve what you're hearing in your head in the DAW. Sometimes it's so challenging and hard, right? Tools like these really help a lot. You take them where you want, and sometimes you let them just take you somewhere else, as long as it works, right? That's cool. So thank you very much. See you in the next video. Ciao.